Hey everyone! Let's start with a simple yet mind-blowing question. What if everything you know about reality, everything you've ever believed about life, existence, and the universe is just a filtered version of the truth? Sounds crazy, right? But what if I told you there are substances, natural substances, found all over the world that might actually allow us to peek behind the curtain of what we call reality? I'm talking about psychedelics. These mysterious compounds have fascinated scientists, philosophers, and adventurers for decades, and today we're going to explore one of the biggest questions of all: can psychedelics reveal the nature of reality? But before we get too far, let me make something clear. This isn't about promoting drug use. Psychedelics are illegal in many places for good reason, and they aren't without risks. But what we can do is look at the science, the psychology, and the experiences of people who have studied these substances under controlled, legal conditions. And let me tell you, the results are absolutely fascinating. So let's break this down. We're going to explore how psychedelics work, what they do to your brain, and why some experts believe they might give us insights into the fundamental nature of reality itself. Stick with me, because things are about to get weird in the best way possible. All right, let's start with the basics. Psychedelics are substances that alter your perception of reality, but they're not just some random chemicals cooked up in a lab. Many psychedelics come straight from nature: mushrooms, plants, even the venom of certain toads. And these substances have been used for thousands of years by indigenous cultures for spiritual and healing purposes. But it wasn't until the 20th century that Western science really started to take notice.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Here's where it gets interesting. Psychedelics don't just make you see colors or patterns or feel trippy. They seem to unlock something in the brain, something that's usually hidden from our everyday experience. Scientists have found that psychedelics can bring parts of the unconscious mind into conscious awareness. Think of it like this: your brain is like a supercomputer, but most of the time, it's running on a very limited program. Psychedelics? They're like a hack that lets you access parts of the system you didn't even know existed. But that raises a huge question: what are we actually accessing? Is it just random brain activity? Or is it something deeper, something real, even more real than what we normally perceive? Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why we don't experience everything around us all at once? Why we don't feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information in the world? It's because our brains act as a filter. They cut out a lot of what's happening so we can focus on what's important for survival. Sounds practical, right? But what if that filter is hiding something essential? What if the real reality is too vast, too complex for us to handle, so our brains only let us see a tiny slice of it? This idea isn't new. Aldous Huxley, the famous writer and philosopher, called the brain a reducing valve. He believed that psychedelics might temporarily turn off this filter, allowing us to experience a much broader spectrum of reality. And guess what? Modern brain imaging studies are starting to back him up. When scientists gave people psychedelics and scanned their brains, they didn't find more activity, like you might expect. They actually found less activity in certain areas, especially in something called the default mode network. Now, the default mode network is a part of the brain that's linked to your sense of self, your ego. It's like the control center for how you see yourself in the world. So when that system quiets down, something profound can happen. People report feeling a sense of oneness with the universe, like the boundaries between me and everything else just disappear. Some call this a mystical experience. Others call it enlightenment. Whatever you call it, it's one of the most powerful effects of psychedelics, and it's why some scientists think these substances might hold the key to understanding consciousness itself. But this is where things get really wild. If psychedelics can dissolve the boundaries of the self, what does that say about who we really are? Are we just individual minds trapped in our bodies? Or are we something more, something connected to a greater, universal consciousness? And if that's the case, what does it mean for our understanding of reality? All right, we've covered a lot already, but trust me, this is just the beginning. In the next part, we're going to dive into some of the most bizarre and fascinating phenomena reported during psychedelic experiences, things like telepathy, precognition, and encounters with otherworldly beings. And we'll ask the big question: could these experiences actually tell us something about the nature of reality, or are they just tricks of the mind? Stick around, because part 2 is going to blow your mind. Okay, welcome back. So far, we've talked about how psychedelics affect the brain and why some scientists think they might let us access a broader reality. But now, let's get into the really mind-bending stuff. Because when people take psychedelics, they don't just report feeling connected to the universe or seeing cool visuals. They also report things that are, frankly, hard to explain, things like telepathy, precognition, and even encounters with what they describe as sentient beings. So here's the question: what's actually going on here? Are these experiences real, or are they just hallucinations? Let's start with shared consciousness. There are countless stories of people taking psychedelics together and somehow knowing what the other person is thinking. Scientists call this telepathy. And while it might sound like science fiction, it's something that's been studied in controlled experiments. One researcher, David Luke, has even conducted tests to see if people on psychedelics can predict random events or share thoughts. The results? Let's just say they're intriguing, but not conclusive. Still, it makes you wonder, are our minds really separate, or are they connected in ways we don't fully understand? But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about encounters. A lot of people who take psychedelics report meeting beings, entities that feel intelligent, conscious, and completely separate from themselves. These beings might look alien, angelic, or completely indescribable. Some people call them spirits or guides. Others think they're projections of the subconscious mind. But here's the kicker: these encounters often feel more real than everyday life. People come out of them convinced that they've tapped into another dimension of reality. Now, before you write this off as pure fantasy, consider this: the idea that there are other dimensions or planes of existence isn't just a psychedelic pipe dream. It's something physicists have been exploring for years. String theory, for example, suggests that there could be multiple dimensions beyond the 3 we experience. So is it possible that psychedelics somehow give us access to these hidden dimensions? Or is it all just happening in the brain? Here's another thought experiment for you. If you had an experience so vivid, so profound, that it completely changed your view of the world, would it matter whether it was real in the conventional sense? Or would the experience itself be enough? That's a question philosophers and scientists are still grappling with. And it brings us back to the core mystery of psychedelics. Do they reveal the nature of reality? Or do they just show us the nature of our own minds? In the next part, we're going to tackle the big one. If psychedelics can give us mystical experiences, can they actually make us better people? Can they change how we see ourselves, how we treat others, and how we live our lives? And what does that say about the role of consciousness in shaping reality? Don't go anywhere. Part 3 is where it all comes together. All right, here's where we tie it all together. We've talked about how psychedelics affect the brain and the mind, and we've explored some of the wild phenomena people experience. But now, let's get practical. If psychedelics can give us a glimpse of a deeper reality, what does that mean for us as individuals and for humanity as a whole? First, let's look at the evidence. Studies have shown that people who have mystical experiences on psychedelics often come out of them profoundly changed. They're more open, more compassionate, and less afraid of death. In fact, research from Johns Hopkins University found that a single psychedelic experience could lead to lasting changes in personality, a rare phenomenon after the age of 30. And these changes aren't just subjective. Friends, family, and coworkers often notice them too. But why does this happen? One theory is that psychedelics can help us confront our deepest fears and traumas. By bringing unconscious material into awareness, they allow us to process and heal in ways that traditional therapy often can't. Another theory is that the mystical experiences themselves a sense of oneness. A connection to something greater can shift our perspective on life. When you see yourself as part of a larger whole, it's harder to stay stuck in patterns of fear, anger, or selfishness. But here's the million-dollar question: if psychedelics can change individuals, could they also change society? Imagine a world where more people felt connected to each other, to the planet, and to the universe as a whole. Could psychedelics help us solve some of our biggest problems like war, inequality, or environmental destruction? Or is that just wishful thinking? Of course, psychedelics aren't a magic bullet. They're not for everyone, and they come with risks. But the growing body of research suggests that these substances might have a unique potential to help us understand ourselves and the world in ways we've barely begun to explore. So what do you think? Are psychedelics a tool for unlocking the mysteries of reality or just a fascinating trick of the brain? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because this is just the beginning of a conversation that could change everything. All right, let's keep going because this conversation is far from over. We've barely scratched the surface of what psychedelics might mean not just for individuals, but for the future of humanity. If you've made it this far, I know you're curious about the deeper implications. So let's take this up a notch. Let's ask the biggest questions. What role do psychedelics play in the evolution of consciousness? Could they be the missing piece in our search for meaning? And ultimately, do they give us a glimpse into the true nature of reality, or are they just showing us a beautiful illusion? Let's unpack this step by step. First, let's talk about the concept of expanded consciousness. When people take psychedelics, they often report feeling like they've tapped into something much larger than themselves, a kind of universal consciousness. This isn't just about seeing cool visuals or feeling high, it's about experiencing reality in a completely different way. People describe feeling like time has stopped, like they're connected to every living thing, or like they've become one with the universe itself. These experiences are often described as ineffable, meaning they're impossible to put into words. But here's the thing, these experiences aren't just random. They're often deeply meaningful. People come out of them saying things like, "I understood love for the first time," or "I saw how everything is connected," and these aren't just fleeting feelings. They can lead to profound changes in how people live their lives. So the question is, where do these experiences come from? Are they just a trick of the brain, or are they revealing something real about the universe? Let's go back to science for a moment. Remember how we talked about the default mode network, the part of the brain that's responsible for your sense of self? When that network quiets down, it's like the boundaries between you and everything else start to dissolve. This is why people often describe psychedelic experiences as ego death. And when the ego dissolves, it opens the door to something much bigger. But here's where it gets really interesting. The idea of a universal consciousness isn't just a psychedelic phenomenon. It's something that's been discussed for centuries in spiritual traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and even some branches of Christianity. These traditions talk about the idea that the self is an illusion, and that beneath the surface, we're all part of a single, infinite consciousness. Psychedelics seem to give people a direct experience of this idea, an experience that can be life-changing. So let's ask the big question: if psychedelics can show us this universal consciousness, does that mean it's real? Are we actually tapping into something fundamental about the nature of reality, or is it just a hallucination? This is where the debate gets tricky. On one hand, skeptics argue that these experiences are just the result of brain activity, neurons firing in strange ways, creating the illusion of connection and meaning. On the other hand, proponents argue that the brain might actually be acting like a receiver or a filter for consciousness. In other words, psychedelics don't create these experiences, they just reveal what's already there. Here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine you're wearing a pair of sunglasses that block out certain colors of light. You've been wearing them your whole life, so you don't even realize they're there. Then, one day you take them off and suddenly you see colors you didn't even know existed. Would you say those colors were an illusion? Or would you say they were always there, but you just couldn't see them before? This is how some people describe the psychedelic experience. It's not about creating something new, it's about seeing something that's been there all along. Now, let's talk about practical implications. If psychedelics really can expand our consciousness and give us a glimpse of universal connection, what does that mean for how we live our lives? For one thing, it might mean rethinking the way we view ourselves and each other. If the boundaries between me and you are just an illusion, then suddenly, things like compassion, empathy, and cooperation start to make a lot more sense. It's not just about being kind, it's about recognizing that we're all part of the same whole. And this isn't just theoretical. Studies have shown that people who have mystical experiences on psychedelics often come out of them with a greater sense of compassion and a stronger desire to help others. They report feeling more connected to nature, more aware of the impact of their actions, and more committed to making the world a better place. So in a way, psychedelics might not just be revealing the nature of reality, they might also be showing us how to live. But let's not sugarcoat it. Psychedelics aren't a magic solution. They're not going to solve all of humanity's problems overnight. They're powerful tools, but they're also risky. They can be incredibly intense, and for some people they can bring up deep fears, traumas, or even psychological harm if not used carefully. That's why the context, the setting is so important. Psychedelics need to be approached with respect, preparation, and guidance, especially if they're ever going to be used safely and effectively on a larger scale. So where does this leave us? At the end of the day, psychedelics raise more questions than answers. They challenge us to rethink everything we thought we knew about the mind, the self, and the universe. They force us to confront the possibility that reality is far stranger and far more beautiful than we can imagine. And while we might not have all the answers yet, one thing is clear: this is a conversation worth having. Before we wrap up, let me leave you with one final question. If you could uncover the true nature of reality, would you want to? Would you be willing to face the unknown, to step beyond the limits of what you think you know, even if it meant challenging everything you believe? It's a scary thought, but it's also an exciting one, because at the end of the day, the search for truth, the search for meaning is what makes us human. So what do you think? Do psychedelics reveal the nature of reality, or are they just showing us a reflection of our own minds? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. And if you found this video as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is just the beginning of a journey into some of the biggest and most mind-blowing questions we can ask. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.